You think money backed by solid gold was the good old days? Think again. That story, it's a lie. A massive financial lie that set us up for the messed up money system we have right now, where the government just prints cash until your savings are dust. Today, we're tearing down the curtain on the system that came before, the one that promised stability but was rigged from the start. In July 1944, right in the middle of World War II, something huge went down in New Hampshire. Not a ski trip, even though that place is beautiful. No, it was a meeting of 44 countries, huddled for nearly a month, trying to figure out how to rebuild the world's money system after the war. They wanted to stop the chaos that led to World War II, the mess after the first big war that basically paved the road to the second. They thought they were building something strong, something fair. But here's the kicker. It was doomed from the very beginning. The biggest flaw? They completely missed it, and it wrecked everything. I'll tell you exactly what that fatal flaw was and how it shaped the world we live in right now. You won't believe how simple yet devastating it was. Make sure you stick around because the most shocking part about how it all ended will be revealed at the very end of this video. Back in World War I, countries basically threw out the gold standard, where their money was actually backed by real gold because they needed to print money like crazy to pay for the war. After that war, some tried to go back to gold, but it was a disaster. Countries didn't trust each other's money. They just hoarded gold instead of letting it flow, which made everything worse. Then came the Great Depression in 1929. Things were crumbling, but central banks were terrified to print money. The last thing they wanted was their cash collapsing, so some even raised interest rates while the economy burned. Then, in 1930, America threw gasoline on the fire with a crazy new tax on imports. This kicked off a massive trade war that slashed world trade by 2/3 in just 4 years. That was it. Countries started ditching gold. The first big one was Britain in 1931. They dropped gold and cut the value of their money by about 25%. Suddenly, their stuff was way cheaper to buy, but it killed exports from every other country still tied to gold. So what did everyone else do? They followed suit, devaluing their own money to try and save their economies. It was a race to the bottom, where everyone tried to export their pain, essentially throwing their neighbors under the bus. This destroyed all trust in how countries handled money internationally and made the Great Depression even worse for everyone. As Europe geared up for another war, money started pouring into the US. Why? Even though America's economy was a mess too, it felt safer, far from the war zone. Investors and even other countries' central banks started turning their assets into gold and shipping it to the US. Then, in 1934, America supercharged this gold rush by raising the official price of gold from about 20 to 35 ounces an ounce. That made everyone want to sell their gold to the US. And guess what? By 1944, America was sitting on a mountain of gold, about 20,000 tons, which was 75% of all the world's gold. Add to that, Europe destroying itself in World War II and America leading the nuclear race, and you had a recipe for American power after the war. This is why the system they came up with in New Hampshire was basically dictated by the United States. Other countries just had to accept it. The Soviet Union, by the way, saw it as what it was, a tool for American economic power, and said, no thank you. So what was the system? It put the US dollar at the absolute center of the world's money universe. The dollar was fixed to gold at $35 an ounce, and the US government promised that foreign governments and central banks could always trade their dollars for gold at that price. Every other country in this new system then fixed their currency to the dollar at a set rate. They had to make sure their currency stayed within a tiny range, just 1% up or down, by buying or selling dollars in the market. This made holding dollars super important for their money reserves. Since America was the biggest economy, the biggest lender, and the biggest exporter by 1944, a ton of global trade ended up being settled in dollars. And since the dollar was supposedly as good as gold, but way easier to move around, it became the world's main reserve currency. But here's where the trust part came in. Everyone had to believe America would actually honor its promise to swap any amount of dollars for gold. To make this new system work, they created two huge institutions, the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, and what became the World Bank. The World Bank was mostly about giving loans to rebuild Europe and help other countries grow, almost all of it in US dollars. The IMF? think of it as the cop on the beat. Its job was to watch what countries were doing with their money and exchange rates, making sure they stuck to their fixed rates. If a country wanted to change their currency value by more than 10%, they needed the IMF's permission, and only if things were totally out of whack, a term that, get this, nobody ever officially defined. The IMF also loaned US dollars to countries in financial trouble so they wouldn't have to devalue their money, which the IMF didn't like. These institutions were supposed to make everything stable and cooperative, but they had a massive problem. They couldn't actually force anyone to do anything, especially not the US. America had this crazy, unfair advantage. It could print the world's reserve currency whenever it wanted. The system demanded that other countries work hard to keep their money fixed to the dollar. But America, whose financial choices impacted everyone, didn't have to follow the same rules. It didn't manage its own exchange rate, so the heavy lifting of keeping this whole system together fell mostly on everyone but the US. This lack of rules for the US was a critical, fatal flaw in the system. And guess what? America didn't even try to make its dollar look credible against gold. Instead, they printed dollars like there was no tomorrow. Why? Huge military spending, wars in places like Vietnam, and big social programs at home all cost a fortune. Every time the IMF tried to make countries be disciplined with their money and America's policies got in the way, guess who won? America. Every single time. Other countries hated this. The French president, Charles de Gaulle, even called it America's exorbitant privilege, basically an unfair advantage. America could pay for its problems just by printing its own money because other countries had to hold it as reserves. If you're thinking rigged, you're not wrong. So was the system doomed because America just refused to play fair? Partially, yes, but that's not the whole story. The system had an even bigger, built-in problem that made it impossible to last. It relied on one country's money as the main source of cash for the whole world. This huge problem was first explained by an economist named Robert Triffin in the early 1960s. He said that for the world to have enough money flowing around, the country issuing the reserve currency, that's America and the dollar, would have to keep sending more and more of it out into the world. As global trade grew and economies expanded, everyone needed more dollars. This demand was met because America kept spending more money than it brought in. But here's the catch. If America kept sending out more dollars than it had gold to back them up with, people would start to lose faith that America could actually swap those dollars for gold. And if enough people got nervous about that, they'd all rush to trade their dollars for gold, triggering a run on the currency and collapsing the entire system. Now, in theory, America could stop this by tightening its belt and stopping its spending. But that would mean starving the rest of the world of needed dollars, possibly leading to a massive economic slowdown. This is why it's called the Triffin dilemma. It's an impossible bind, a no-win situation that made the whole structure fundamentally unsustainable. And it played out exactly as Triffin predicted. America kept spending more than it earned, flooding the world with dollars. At first, other countries loved it. They got the money they needed to grow and rebuild. But then those dollar piles held by foreign banks just kept growing, and it became impossible to ignore. The amount of dollars supposedly backed by gold was exploding, but the actual gold in America wasn't. The world needed more dollars to grow, which meant America had to print more, but this made a complete joke of the dollar's gold promise. In a normal world, the dollar's value would have plummeted, but this system, with the dollar's special role and everyone else fixed to it, prevented that from happening. One expert, Lynn Alden, argues that this made the dollar artificially strong, which meant American exports were too expensive and imports were too cheap. This just made America's trade problems worse, pushing even more dollars out into the world, creating a self-reinforcing mess. She says America's exorbitant privilege of being the world's money printer came with an exorbitant burden, the slow destruction of its own factories and a growing financial hole with the rest of the world. Even though a lot of this happened after the system ended, this system is why the dollar is still the world's reserve currency today, casting a huge shadow over us all. So, how did this whole charade end? As you might guess, the world figured out the system was broken and wouldn't last. This system of fixed exchange rates let America export its own money printing problems to everyone else. It was like a free money cheat code for the US at everyone else's expense. And predictably, everyone else got sick of it fast. Countries like France, Germany, Japan, and Switzerland saw the writing on the wall. They decided to trade their dollars for actual gold. France alone, between 1965 and 1971, brought home about 3,000 tons of gold from American vaults. This led to an embarrassing situation. Way more dollar claims floating around than the actual gold America had. The rate of gold leaving the US just sped up as central banks raced to avoid being stuck with worthless dollars. As the lie about gold backing wore thin, people started betting heavily against the dollar in the markets, expecting it to crash or the system to break. For America, cutting the dollar's value was a political nightmare, and other countries didn't want to make their own currency stronger because that would hurt their exports. This made the whole system rigid, unable to adapt, and problems just piled up to unsustainable levels. By the summer of 1971, the game was definitely over. The artificially strong dollar was destroying America's trade, and the U.S. was running out of gold as another wave of people tried to cash in their dollars. But it was still a shock when on August 15th, 1971, President Richard Nixon appeared on TV and suddenly announced that the whole system was canceled. He said he was stabilizing the dollar, but what he really did was put a not-so-temporary end to gold convertibility. He didn't even consult anyone but a small secret group of advisors just 2 days before. His Treasury Secretary, John Connolly, was the one who told him just to scrap the whole thing. And later that year, he famously told a stunned meeting of the world's top economies, "The dollar is our currency, but it's your problem." And that, my friends, is how our current financial system was born. Money backed by nothing but the government telling you it has value. Within a few years of Nixon's announcement, most countries just gave up trying to back their money with anything else. They let their currency's value float freely, which honestly has led to a slow, steady decline in their worth over time. So, next time someone talks about the good old days when dollars were backed by gold, remember, it was a complete mess. It was rigged, unstable, and ultimately collapsed because of its own built-in flaws and America's choices. The more things change, the more they stay the same, right? If this breakdown opened your eyes, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss out on more truth bombs like this. I'll see you next time.